Okay, so you mentioned you have a 15-month-old. I'm just going to ask you like the real question. So what do you plan on doing for your son?
I get I get this question all the time, and it's funny because I don't have a straight up answer. And the reason for that is because I've been in the school system long enough to know that whatever I end up doing will be better than what he would be receiving in school. Two, based on all the research that I've done, it's very, very clear to me that kids don't need to be in school or receive any type of formal education until they're about 7 years old. And in fact,
Yeah.
that's how they do it in Finland, for example. Like kids don't start school until they're 7. And people are often like, well, obviously then when they start school at 7, they're so behind. And it's like, behind on what? All these
I know.
parameters and all this like criteria that we've created ourselves. But if you actually look at the data, it doesn't show that. Like Finland students are not behind at all. In fact, once they start, they've had 7 years to play around, unstructured learning, self-directed learning. They're very autonomous. They are very excited about life and about learning because it has not been, controlled from such a young age. And so once they enter school, they're ready to start grasping on things, and they're like sponges, right? They start to absorb everything. So if you actually compare a student in 7th grade in the US, for example, with one in Finland towards the end of the year, they're pretty much at the same place. The difference is that the
Yeah.
Finland students are very excited and they haven't lost that curiosity. So I am just really chill for the first 7 years. I just want him to play. I take him to a lot of different classes so that he's interacting with other kids like different ages. I just keep him. My number one priority is to keep his curiosity alive. Once he gets a little bit older and he starts to try out different things, I'm a big believer in letting them try a range of different activities and sports and instruments until they sort of figure out where they want to spend their time on.
Yeah.
And then, so giving them free time, but sort of the resources and the creative space and other students to take any interest they have and any productive interest they want in whatever direction they want. So I'm going to be very flexible. I do love the Montessori approach, for example. However, something I've noticed is that many schools nowadays call themselves Montessori, but they're not really Montessori. Like they just have maybe one or two things, and then they're very scripted in certain ways. And then so we have to be careful when we're choosing where to put our kids to see if they're
Yeah.
actually any kind of play-based elementary, let's say, or like early childhood program, I think is super important. And I think it's great where kids get to sort of explore different things and learn how to be independent and be around other kids. I think that's super important. I love forest schools. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I find them
Yeah.
fascinating. It sort of solves that problem that we were talking about of having kids confined from such a young age when their bodies are developing. So forest schools, kids are running around, they're in nature, they're exploring and learning based on the things that they're encountering. And so I think that's really great. I'm also a fan of microschools. And, you can find, there's some great hubs online that you can find, like Prenda microschools, where they, depending on where you live, they'll tell you, what microschools are around your area. Or if you want to start your own microschool, you can go ahead and do that. And microschools, for those that don't know and are listening to this, are any sort of like smaller class, and they can take place at a house of one of your neighbors or at a church or sort of like a physical space, but they're usually small groups of students. They're mixed age and they're learning through projects. The curriculums are very flexible depending on what the parents of the kids want. And so it's really a way to start that formal education without squashing all these things that I claim that schools do. And so I'm also interested in that. And maybe I decide to do my own, or maybe I decide to have him join one of them. And then once he does hit that age around 7, 8, I plan to use something like the digital tutor, the synthesis tutor, where he will be able to start to learn all the hardcore academics, let's call it that, for an hour a day, and in a way that's so what I love about the digital tutor is that it's like this infinitely patient teacher, right? Like one of my biggest frustrations in school was that I could not possibly divide myself. I had 30 students and I couldn't, I would see little Morgan that was struggling with this math concept that clearly had all this, gaps from previous years, but I couldn't sit down with you until you mastered it, right? Because sometimes it took a while and I couldn't stop the whole class.
Yeah.
And that was very frustrating. And I had no idea how we were going to solve this problem. Then when I suddenly learned about the AI tutors, I was like, oh my God, like these tutors will stay with you until you've mastered the material, and they will not give up. They will not, move on until you've mastered it. And so suddenly what you start to see in the students is that they start to gain this confidence that they really lack in traditional school environments, right? And they're like, wait, I'm actually good at math. And they start to see the practical application of math, because that's the other thing. Everything we teach has an immediate practical application, and they see how they're going to use it in the real world. And so I plan to use something like that to start covering the hardcore academics. And then I'm a big believer in project-based schools. I think that's the most fun and the best way to learn and to actually have his things stick. When you give them a project or you give them a problem, and then they're going to be like, okay, wait, I need to learn how to work with big numbers in order to do this. Or, oh, I need to learn about the planets in order to be able to figure out. So there's suddenly like the desire to learn about these things, and also the, they understand how it fits into the larger picture. Because like I mentioned earlier, in school, we are like, okay, math, 45 minutes. Now close math, open science, 45 minutes. Now close science, now let's do reading. Things are not connected. So it's really, really hard for you to learn that way because knowledge is interconnected and our brains are interconnected. And so when you have a project or you have a problem like they did at an Astra in synthesis, then suddenly all these things come together in a way that makes sense to you and you understand how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Does that make sense? And so
totally.
That's definitely going to be a huge part. And there are some great project-based schools. The big problem is that, you're limited to your geographical location. So if I live in Miami right now, like if I don't find one that's in Miami, then that means that, I probably have to move somewhere else. So I'm hoping that as things continue to advance, we can have access to this sort of online communities working in this project-based learning so that we can do that maybe online. And then we can use the rest of the day to do other things. And so a big thing that I've learned, in this past years that I've been in the alternative education world was that before I was like, oh no, online education, big no-no. Like there is nothing like the human interactions. Like I've been a teacher. I understand how important it is for kids to feel like there's a caring human on the other side and the physical aspect of things. So I was like, this is never going to work. But I was very surprised because what I realized is, online education, what it does is it delivers things more tailored to you and faster so that you're not in school for 7 hours a day, right? Because it's not true that kids are learning for 7 hours a day. I've been a teacher. There's a lot of wasted time and daydreaming and, kids are not tuned in. So if you could have them, and also we know that their attention spans are very short. You can't have a kid, trying to pay attention to you for 45 minutes. They're not going to. And so if you can deliver this that's according to their attention spans, fast, to the point, applicable, relevant, exciting, then they have the rest of the day to do other things. Like that's really exciting. Like that's the kind of education I would have wanted as a kid, right? And so I'm looking forward to doing this. But again, to sort of wrap up my answer, I am not rushing into it. I don't have this pressure that I see a lot of my friends that are like, oh my God, like my kid is 1 and I'm already thinking I need to enroll them in this school because of the spots and this and that and all this pressure, because I know that this pressure, we've made it up, right? There is no data that shows that kids need to learn how to read by 7 or learn how to do math by this grade. No, somebody came up with that at some point and we've not questioned it and just sort of, adopted this. It has to be this way. And then we stress out about it. We stress our kids about it. And then all this made up pressure, right? I don't have that because I already know that he can learn how to read at 2. He can learn how to read at 11 and it's okay. He's not going to be behind. As long as I'm doing my part, which is keep him excited about everything, make sure that he's happy with whatever decision that we make, be able to pivot anytime anything's not going well, because that's a big one, right? I can say right now, I'm going to try this, but maybe I have a student, like maybe I have a kid that's like my husband, very traditional, or he wants to go to school. And if that's the case, by all means, let's enroll him in a school that he wants. As long as he's excited, he's asking questions, he comes back and he's like telling me what he learned about and he wants to keep learning, then something's working. And so I'm very flexible when it comes to that. And I'm just taking it day by day. I'm also seeing how many things are coming up nowadays so quickly that I am very optimistic that by the time he's 7, which is sort of around that time that I said that we can start to think of a more structured and, direct instruction, there are going to be so many other options available. So I'm really looking forward to that.
For sure.